It's our 5th year hosting Mobilize Women, and we thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you who are new to Ellevate, we are a coalition of ambitious, supportive women and allies who show up for each other and mobilize to change the culture of business. Over the last 20 years, we've perfected the art of creating safe spaces for women to be honest about work and get validation, perspective, and actionable advice. This entire week is designed with that in mind. It's a safe space for you to share your stories, opinions, and even challenge your perspective. Throughout the week, you'll learn from speakers from all different backgrounds who are excited to share their stories and advice with you. Please listen with intent and an open mind. Take what you hear and think about how it applies to your life. You'll have time and space to process with others at our roundtables, mentoring meetups, and workshops. Taking some of these lessons over in a safe space is the best way to really contextualize and come up with plans of action. The more we come together to share different experiences, the more we realize we're not alone. There are other people who care and want to help you make meaningful change in the world. Before we dive into housekeeping tips, we'd love to thank our sponsors, especially our presenting sponsor, RBC Wealth Management. So a few Zoom-specific additions and tips. Please use the chat to engage with others and our speakers. Quote the things you hear to amplify the message. Drop helpful links to life-changing books, websites, and apps. Also, post your questions in the Q&A box for the moderator to see, and click the CC closed captions icon to toggle them on. If need be, you can privately message the Ellevate team. We are identifiable as host and co-host, and we have Ellevate in our names. We are recording the session, and it will be posted to the Ellevate site for our members to view as an evergreen resource. So today we'll kick things off with about a 23-minute self-defense demo from Rana Abdelhamid, human rights organizer, martial artist, and social entrepreneur focused on the empowerment of marginalized communities, and the executive director of Malika. Followed by a conversation with Rana led by Yasmin Tayag. So take it away, Rana. We're so excited to learn some moves.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really excited to be sharing some self-defense techniques with you all today to start your morning. And I'm just going to very quickly share a couple of slides to talk through this. And I'm really excited for you all to also use the chat as you're going through some of these techniques and as I explain some of this. So just to start, I want to introduce Malika. So Malika is a nonprofit organization that I founded when I was about 16 years old. Unfortunately, I founded Malika because I myself experienced a hate-based attack when I was assaulted by a man who tried to take off my hijab when I was a teenager. And I started Malika because it was really through my own healing process that I was searching for a space where I could get together with young women in my neighborhood and really for a vision that no one in the world should feel unsafe walking down the street because of their identity. No one in the world should feel unsafe in their own skin, in their own home, because of different forms of gender-based and domestic violence. And really just got together with young women in my neighborhood and started teaching karate. At the time, I had been doing karate and now have a black belt in Shotokan karate. And that has evolved into becoming this grassroots organization that has trained thousands of women across the globe, that is focused on both trauma-informed facilitation, healing justice, self-defense instruction, organizing, and financial literacy. And I'll be showing a component of our class. So I just wanted to show that typically we have a 90-minute class where there's 3 parts: boundary setting, effective de-escalation, and exit strategy. But for today, which shortened to 23 minutes, plus we'll have some questions. So I'll walk us through part 1, which is boundary setting and intervention, which is mostly going to be focused on bystander intervention and some techniques for how you yourself could de-escalate. And then sell you on self-defense so that hopefully if you're super excited and into it, you could stay involved in self-defense programming either in your own area or through Malika. And I'll plug in some of our resources. So I'm excited to also plug that. So I know we have the chat, and I'm a super extrovert, so typically it's harder for me to do online sessions because I don't know how people are reacting. So what I would love is if you feel comfortable, if you could introduce yourself in the chat, use the chat to let me know why is self-defense important to you. If you want to let us know about the state of your heart, and if there's anything else you want to share about yourself, feel free to do so in the chat. Great. Um, just walking through some of our self-defense principles as something that I think everyone should be aware of. Oh, and I just realized my video wasn't even on, as that everyone should be aware of in terms of their, the reality of self-defense and what self-defense could offer, but also what guides our self-defense pedagogy. So the first thing is that our self-defense classes reject victim blaming. So the idea is oftentimes people, when they experience an act of violence, like when I experienced an act of violence, I felt a deep sense of shame that I should have known how to respond, that the onus was on me to be able to de-escalate. But in reality, the onus is always on the person who is doing the harm to not do harm, right? It is never the fault of someone who experiences harm to have to know how to engage in any way. Our self-defense class understands that the reality is, right, in the world, is that there is these forms of public violence, there are these forms of private violence, and having self-defense is really just a tool to be able to create safety for ourselves, to be able to feel more confident, feel more safe in our own skin as we experience the world. The second is that, when we do practice, if you're going to practice here, if you're going to practice beyond this moment, whoever you're practicing with, it's really important to ask for consent before each move. If they feel comfortable, practicing that technique, people's bodies and people's own histories with violence can create trauma if they don't feel comfortable engaging in a particular technique. The other thing is teaching awareness, assessment, and verbal skills before we teach physical self-defense skills. Oftentimes, even verbal compliance, verbal dominance, which I'll talk about in a bit, can be really effective in de-escalating before you even get to anything physical, before you throw a strike, before you use any grappling techniques, and even just awareness of your situation, assessing your situation can help you de-escalate and help you get out of a situation from a physical self-defense standpoint before you get physical. Sometimes people will take a self-defense class and they'll feel like they're Jackie Chan, or they'll feel like they're really, they have the confidence of the world to be able to de-escalate a situation. But again, the reality is practice is key. Building muscle memory is so key, because in a moment of violence, things happen so quickly that unless your body is used to reacting, is used to doing a technique, oftentimes like your body will go into fight or flight mode and will go into what it is naturally prone to do. So that could be shutting down, and that's very natural. It could also be that you're going to, escape in a different way, but not engage in a way that is technically accurate. So practice is really, really key. We also recognize that self-defense has been part of many movements, many feminist movements historically, many civil rights movements, Black Power movements historically. And we are part of that broader narrative. And we want to root our practice in the traditions of community organizing and of healing that have come before us. So really, really glad that we are part of that, and want to always uplift these broader levels of engagement that have existed for so long. And I'm seeing folks are putting into the chat who they are. So thank you so much for introducing yourselves. And for also, I'm seeing some people talk about their own experiences with violence. And I'm really, really, really sorry that this is the world that we exist in, but also really grateful for everyone's courage and power to speak about their experiences. So thanks for being here, and thanks for sharing. Again, the ultimate goal, like I always say, like my goal is to teach myself out of a self-defense class. It's to organize myself out of a self-defense class. I never want us to have to use self-defense. I don't want hate-based violence. I don't want sexist violence. I don't want gender-based violence. I don't want, all the different forms of violence that require us to feel unsafe in our own skin. And so the world that we want to build in beyond these self-defense tools is to be able to push ourselves out of having to feel unsafe in any way. So again, this part one, I'm going to go through some boundary setting and some bystander intervention as a type of framing for potentially all of you taking more self-defense. Some situational awareness techniques. Situational awareness is key, because even before anything escalates, you could begin to be aware of your surroundings, what's going on, to start to think about de-escalation before you get to that moment where your adrenaline is rushing, where it's super intense. So first of all, like whenever you're in a situation, like I'm a New Yorker, I'm in New York, being on the subway is a really good example of this. Just being aware of your surroundings. Like, is anything happening that could potentially escalate? Are people fighting? Is there an argument? Do you need to be aware that you might want to intervene? And being aware of it from three standpoints. We talk about three zones. We talk about the yellow zone. We talk about the green zone, the yellow zone, and the red zone. And oftentimes people think these zones are associated with distance, but actually they're just associated with your level of comfortability. You can evaluate your zones even on a computer, experiencing online violence, right? And you could be in the red zone, but someone could be really far away from you. When you're in your red zone, that means you're uncomfortable. When you're in your yellow zone, that means you're beginning to feel like something might be wrong, but you're not necessarily feeling uncomfortable yet. Green zone, you're feeling comfortable. And when you're in your red zone and yellow zone, that's when you start to think that you might use a self-defense technique. And that's when you might actually use distance as a tactic, even just movement in this moment. And when you think about movement, getting away, just remembering to never give the situation your back. So always facing the situation, walking backwards as much as you can, hands up when you're able, and doing so in a way that isn't necessarily egging someone on or escalating the situation, but really de-escalating, right? So if someone's already starting to egg you on verbally, they're trying to be harmful physically in any way, distance movement is actually such a strategic tactic that people underestimate for so oftentimes. Using evasion where possible. So an example of evasion is, for example, if someone trying to understand what type of violence is going on, right? If it's a hate-based attack, obviously that's very different than if someone just is trying to rob you, is trying to take something off of you, and being able to throw something on the ground, giving it up, is a form of de-escalation that is really, really powerful and really, really important. And if you are going into a situation where you know there might be a level of escalation, having a clear exit plan. And this is particular to if you are going to a political action, you're going to the Women's March, right? And you know that like the Women's March might get a little bit chaotic. Do you know if there is a location nearby to the protest site that you can go to that you will feel safe? A friend's house, a coffee shop, where like if you need to duck out and you need to go indoors, you know what your exit plan is going to be. So these are just some tips on situational awareness. I have 10 minutes. So methods of engagement that we think about in bystander intervention. Bystander intervention is really, really important and really key to self-defense because it is rooted in our awareness and the importance of community safety. So self-defense and the idea of self-defense and learning a self-defense class is really powerful. Going to a martial arts class is really powerful because you could de-escalate on your behalf, but also de-escalating as a collective on behalf of someone who's experiencing violence can be really powerful. And in self-defense classes, there are 4 tactics that we talk about, and these are very common across various different methodologies. The first type of intervention that we discussed is called direct intervention. The second is called delayed. The third is distract, and the fourth is delegate. Direct is pretty self-explanatory in terms of the descriptiveness of the name. If you see someone being harmed, right? You're in a public situation or even in a private situation. Direct means you're engaging the person who's being harmful. You're saying to them, this behavior is not acceptable here. We don't, maybe you might say something like, New York does not stand for xenophobic violence or xenophobic language, right? You might say something like, I will not stand for sexist violence here, right? And you are very much directly engaged. You might even put your body, right, in between the person who's being harmed and the person doing the harm. And being aware that direct intervention very much can escalate the violence, right? And it also can redirect the violence towards your body. And that's something that, is a risk that many people are willing to take because they understand the importance of standing up and being vocal against something that is harmful. Delayed intervention is a form of intervention that I highly encourage. It's almost on the other spectrum of direct, which is, say you're in a public situation, or you're in a classroom, or you're in a workplace, right? And someone says something that is harmful. And maybe you freeze up too, like you don't feel comfortable in the moment to say something. Delayed is really important because it affirms someone's experience. Someone said something harmful in a work meeting, right? And you freeze up. Someone said a sexist joke and you didn't find it comfortable. You didn't find it funny, but you also didn't feel comfortable saying anything in the moment. What you could do is you could actually text someone afterwards and you could be like, hey, I heard what so-and-so said to you in this meeting, and that was not appropriate. And I'm really sorry for that. And I kind of noticed that you were uncomfortable by it too. I just wanted to check in. Is there anything I could do? Can I be a witness with you? Would you like to grab coffee to debrief that moment? Whatever it might be after the fact, even like in a public situation, after the harmful situation has de-escalated, potentially someone just said something, they walked off, you could go in and you could affirm that person. You could say, I heard that. Is there anything I could do? That is really powerful too, because it affirms someone in that moment and makes them feel more safe in that moment. Distract is basically, instead of engaging the person who is experiencing the harm, or instead of engaging the person who's doing the harm, you engage the person who is experiencing the harm. So you literally ignore the person who maybe is saying something harmful or maybe is trying to engage physically, and you remove the person who is experiencing the harm out of the situation. So you could literally be like, hey, pretend you know them, right? People know of this, like within the context of clubs or parties, especially within the context of, a woman being made to feel uncomfortable by a man and saying, this moment is uncomfortable, so I'm going to pretend I know you and I'm going to take you out of this, right? Or I saw something happen. So distract can be really effective too. And delegate is one of my favorite, which is, you don't feel comfortable going into a situation on your own. You might gut check people around you. You might be like, hey, do you see what's going on there? That's really harmful. Should we go over together? And you go over as a group. You go over as a three, 2 people, 4 people, and you try to de-escalate collectively. When you go into these situations, again, we're assuming that, at the beginning, that this is not necessarily physical. Some of this stuff is using voice, or it could be physical. Voice is also really important. So the first thing I mentioned, right, movement, just literally being able to get away and not engaging the situation is really powerful. And then using your voice could be really powerful. Using your voice is really powerful because you could do multiple things. You have multiple techniques that you could leverage. The first is being specific and asking for what you need. Again, like being a New Yorker, oftentimes I'm on the subway and something will happen. And as someone who's a trained martial artist, a self-defense instructor, I'm always like very hyper aware. I'm like, oh, do I need to intervene? Like, is something happening? And sometimes I'm not sure. I'm like, are they friends? Are they joking? Like, is this a situation that this person has, like they can handle it, right? Or do they actually need help? And then also when someone experiences an act of violence, their automatic response, like, for example, if someone touched you inappropriately, you might be like, what are you doing? Who do you think you are? Stop, right? But that doesn't really tell anyone around you what is happening, what you want them to do, who you want to stop. Instead, being specific and asking for what you need could be a savior, because literally I could say, woman in the red shirt, get your hand off of me. I do not know you. And I could say, woman in the gray shirt, can you help me? I need help, right? And so you're not only telling everybody who's doing it, what they're doing, what you want them to stop, but you're also now engaging someone who might be impacted by bystander effect, which is very natural. People will freeze up. It is very like human. It is a natural thing that your body will do to ask for help, right? And then someone is more likely to help because you ask them specifically. If they don't engage, they don't feel comfortable, you ask someone else, right? And you just keep going. And that's really, really effective. The other technique that I appreciate is oftentimes broken record technique. Although yesterday I used the broken record technique and it definitely like escalated the situation a little bit, but my understanding of and my experience with the broken record technique, before yesterday, is actually just using the one phrase over and over and over again in order to not engage. So for example, someone might come up to you and maybe like they start a conversation. It's normal at first. They're like, when's the bus coming? What time is it? What, are I like your shoes, whatever it might be. And then they start to get a little inappropriate. They make you feel uncomfortable. The moment they make you feel uncomfortable, you don't have to engage. You don't have to say anything. But if you choose to say something, you could say the same thing over and over and over again, making it very clear to them you don't want to engage them. You don't want to have a conversation. There's also two other things. We say verbal compliance and verbal dominance. Verbal compliance is literally like you're walking down the street, you bump into someone, they get really angry. They're like, who do you, like, why'd you hit me? Like, why'd you bump into me? Who do you think you are? Instead of being like, I didn't bump into you, like how dare you speak to me this way? Verbal compliance is like, I'm so sorry. I really didn't mean to. Like, you're just apologizing, right? And sometimes like you want to do that, sometimes you don't, right? It depends on your mood. But verbal compliance can be really, really effective if you don't want something verbal to escalate into something physical. And then we talk about verbal dominance. So verbal dominance is you're gonna be very clear. And that goes back to the specificity. You're gonna say, back off, step away, do not put your hands on me. Give me 6 feet. I need 6 feet. Stand 6 feet away from me, right? Your hands are up in front of your face. You're making it very clear. You're being firm. You're making it clear that you are willing to do something if they are going to continue, right? And all of this stuff, again, it's really important. I think I have a minute. It's really important to think about practice, even with verbal, because oftentimes we're socialized to be polite, right? In many different cultural backgrounds, in many different genders, that you want to be kind, right? You want to be polite. If someone's asking for something, when you feel uncomfortable, you might naturally giggle, right? These are normal responses. I've been across the globe working with different groups of women, and this is like everywhere in the world. And practicing using your own voice, using this language can be really effective for, again, when you're in that moment. The last thing I'm going to share before we transition into the Q&A section of this is, if you remember nothing else, just remember that bodies are really powerful, regardless of your frame, right? Like, you can't see now, but I'm actually 5'1". And the powerful body looks like many things. And when I think about pressure points, I think these are really important to be aware of, because basically learning a strike, and usually I will use a palm strike to any of these pressure points, or learning a knee strike to any of these pressure points, can do so much harm to someone, regardless of how many times they go to the gym. My favorite weak point is actually the knee, doing a strike to the knee, doing a strike to the groin, regardless of sex. The solar plexus instead of the stomach, right? The biceps, if someone's grabbing you like this, the neck, a jab to the neck. Eyes, if you are up for it. The nose is also a really good place to strike. The jaw is a really good place to strike, and the ears for balance. And so I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'll also just really quickly plug in that we have these videos. If you go to selfdefensestarterkit.com, if you go to melika.org, where you can watch our techniques, and I'll stop here and take questions. And I'm really excited to be in conversation as well with Yasmin. So thank you all so much. Try to be on time, a little bit over, but hopefully this was useful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rana. That was energizing. The chat is on fire. There's so many tips and just experiences that people are talking about.
I love this chat right now. I'm just seeing it. I'm like, yes, please. This is amazing. This gives me life.
Fantastic. So now we'll shift gears for about a 30-minute conversation between you and Yasmin Tayag, science editor and journalist for Medium.
Hi, Rana, thank you for such an awesome overview of what you teach. So much of it, as I saw in the chat, resonated with the women here, and me especially the part about like being polite. I don't want to get in people's way, but as I learned in the course of my my own journey into self-defense, as I'll tell everyone here about in a few minutes, you need to practice it so you feel like they feel authentic coming out of your mouth, and that can be hard. And so I want to tell everyone here that one of the reasons I am here speaking with Rana today is because I recently published a long article in the New York Times about my own journey into self-defense. As a Filipino woman, it has been very scary to live in New York City in the past few months, past year, because of the anti-Asian violence that we've been seeing. It's been horrible. And I have never felt afraid to be in the city until this year, and that felt very jarring to me. So I was thinking, like, what can I do? What can I do for my other Asian friends? And I had the idea to hire a self-defense instructor. This was just totally out of the blue. And we set up a little class in Washington Square Park. and we did an hour-long session learning jujitsu. That was her martial arts background. And so I came away from that with a couple of new skills that obviously I have to practice. But what I felt so strongly and felt very surprised about was how much confidence I had after just that one session. Just thinking like, oh, my body can do these things. And it's something that had never occurred to me before. So Rana, your experience is so much longer than mine. And I want to ask you a little bit about, what have you learned about the power of your body over the course of your beginning to learn self-defense and then becoming an instructor? And, how did that lead to any healing that you felt you might have needed?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And also thank you so much for sharing that experience and for your courage and for writing that article and for bringing together folks in community around safety. I think, as a Muslim woman, it always like breaks my heart when there is more incidents of hate-based violence, because I never thought 10 years ago that this would still be something we're fighting against, right? And I hope that one day that we could all truly feel safe, right? And walk down the streets and not be afraid just because of our identities. And it's really heartbreaking to see what's happening to the Asian community right now, particularly East Asian community. So thank you for your leadership there. In terms of my own learnings as a self-defense instructor, self-defense learner, definitely, somatic healing is so powerful, and being able to step into the power of your body when your body feels powerless in moments of violence is really healing. And that's why we tie healing justice with self-defense, and we do trauma-informed facilitation, because there's a lot to even debrief. I don't know if you felt that way, but after you take a self-defense class, you want to like unpack, like, what did I just go through, right? Because it's like you're using every part of your body. You're like understanding how you could, like, for example, get someone who's 300 pounds off of you for the first time. And you're understanding like you're actually breaking the perception of your own body that you've internalized for all these years, which is like, I'm weaker, right? And I don't have the capacity and don't have the ability to like defend myself or like be strong, right? And for me, that's super powerful. And I think like linking healing with self-defense is so incredible. And it's definitely transformed my relationship with my body in so many different ways. And I've seen it, right? Especially with young women, like teenagers I work with, young girls I work with, but even with like aunties I work with, right? Who like are like, oh, I'm not that strong. Like I don't have strong like lower body strength. Like I can hardly like walk around the block. But then I'm like, but y'all have like hella upper body strength, right? And it's like you're seeing them like throw a real punch, and it's really beautiful. And that's why I like highly suggest to folks to take even 1 or 2 classes.
Yeah, totally. And I feel very privileged to be able to say I've never actually experienced an assault, but so going through this class and working with a partner and actually feeling even just a simulation of someone grabbing you, it was so shocking to me. And I definitely felt like I had to debrief afterwards. And what you were saying about women often coming into classes and aunties and, women of all types having apprehensions and misconceptions about their own body, I think that's really true. And I found this in the course of researching my article. Can you tell me a little bit more about, what women maybe get wrong about their own bodies and why you think we feel this way?
Yeah, I mean, every single message, right, that we receive growing up, I think through media, through storytelling, through narrative. Now I feel like, the narrative is shifting in ways, but the mainstream narrative, right, and the mainstream perception is that we are the weaker gender, right, or we are the weaker sex. And obviously, I think this falls in line and falls true for non-binary folks as well, right, and trans folks as well, that any gender minoritized people within the context of patriarchy, within the context of misogyny, we are socialized to think that we don't have power, right? And we're also stripped of our power, right? In instances of violence, financially, right? Through economic systems and through social systems. And for me, it is a reclamation of that power through self-defense and a re-socialization. Like, we're literally unlearning how we are taught to react to violence. And I saw people were agreeing with this, right? Where like you just smile and you're polite, right? Even if someone makes you feel uncomfortable, we're relearning what our body is actually capable of, and that we're actually not a weaker gender, because our bodies are fully capable of self-defense. Our bodies are fully capable of de-escalation of violence and creating pain to someone, truly, right? If we need to like make sure that we are getting out of a violent situation. And the weak points are such a key point of that, right? It's not about how many times you go to the gym, because you're not going to grow muscle on your kneecaps, right? Like, it's like, or also it's not about height, because most people's kneecaps, like I would literally have my classes, especially working with youth, like someone who's like 6'3" and someone who's like 4'11" line up, and their kneecaps are exactly the same height, and they're like, whoa, what? And so like you could reach people's kneecaps, like it's not getting higher, and doing a strike to a kneecap has someone on the ground, right? And it's like super easy. So there is such easy things that you could do, that you could learn in a 90-minute class. You don't have to become a martial arts expert. That completely reframes your understanding of your body, your relationship with your body, and then your ability to de-escalate once you have those skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think recognizing that, no matter what your size, your shape, the fact that you can do certain things is, we learned this one move to use if someone grabs your ponytail.
Yes.
And we would reach behind, and then through some maneuver, you step back, you flip them around so that you have the wrist in a wrist lock. And it was so simple. And I did it with a partner who was like 6 feet tall. I was like, wow, I could break his wrist just like that. So I thought that was very cool. And, the fact that women of all ages can also take part in this. I think in my own research, I found that the more elderly people feel like they are overlooked by self-defense, or that they can't participate in it. Even my own mom who's 70 said, I can't do that. I was like, well, I think you'd be surprised. Apparently striking someone with a cane is very effective.
Yeah. I've had disabled folks in my class, and there's like so many things that you could do. There's so many things that you could do. I think like people of all body types, people with different, different disabilities, and folks with different body shapes, and folks at different like athletic levels. Like, I haven't worked out in a minute, don't tell anyone. Like it, like there are things, it's about technique, it's about like being able to really maneuver a situation tactically, more so than it is about like how much strength you have in your body. And people get really surprised about the strength in their body. People are really strong and they don't realize. And that's such an incredible transformation to like realize, wow, I am strong.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, one of my biggest takeaways from this class that I took was not only feeling physical strength, but also sort of emotional strength, and the strength to stand up to somebody, even if it was just in practice. And it sounds like this is something that is common in women who take self-defense. So could you tell us a little more about, the sense of confidence and agency that you learn from self-defense can translate into other aspects of your life, whether professional or private?
Yeah, absolutely. I oftentimes like I use some of these examples too of bystander intervention in the work, like in a workplace context. I don't know if you caught that, but I think like it gives you courage to speak up when something doesn't feel comfortable and something doesn't feel right. And I think there are many moments in my own professional career as like a working woman where you know, someone like microaggressed me, and like, I was like, wow, no one responded. Like no one said anything, right? Like literally, does everybody think this is okay? You know, and I wish so much, or moments in which I froze, right? Like I saw something and I was just like, oof, I don't know if, you know, I don't know what to say. But then I use some of those techniques of bystander intervention, and I do delayed engagement. Like I check in with the person. I was like, I say, I'm so sorry. Like I froze in that moment, but I just want to make sure you're okay. Is there anything I can do? And this is like in a workplace, right? Like it's in a classroom setting that you could do this. It's not necessarily on the street. You're being attacked, someone's harming you. And also like, I think you move in the world differently. You occupy space differently when you go through somatic healing, when you understand that your body is powerful, right? When you understand that you can feel safe and you could protect yourself, right? Versus walking around, insecure, walking around with this internalized message that you aren't powerful. The difference in that is difference of that is night and day. And I always talk about the importance of self-defense, especially for young people, because I think young women in particular, imagine getting that at a young age, and then you get to live your life, right?
No, I missed
right.
out.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know I would love to hear from you too, like having gone through a couple of self-defense classes, if you felt that shift or what type of impact it had for you beyond obviously the class.
Yeah, definitely. I felt like I moved differently. I felt like I walked more confidently in the world, and I felt better about looking people in the eye if I felt nervous. I'm sure everyone here knows that feeling of walking down the street and you're not sure if somebody over there is looking at you funny, and you're like, do I walk away? But to just look them in the eye and just be like, I see you, and just keep going. That to me was powerful. I never did that before. But in other aspects of my life, I felt like I had more agency in being able to just say what I wanted, to assert myself. And it's not like I'm a pushover in most of my life, but I don't always speak up, even if I have a conviction that I want something. And even after just one, I actually took 2 classes, I felt, well, why shouldn't I? I want something. I have every, I can ask for it. And that was powerful and surprising, because I didn't expect to have that impact from a physical class.
Yeah, it's amazing. It really is. It's very transformative. So everyone take a self-defense class.
Yeah, highly recommend.
I'm actually in New York. I mean, you know this. I'm in Queens, and I go to Washington Square Park all the time. And as you were talking, I was like, we should do a self-defense class in Washington Square Park together.
Yeah, let's do it. Everyone here is invited.
Yes, wouldn't that be amazing? I would be
Yeah.
down. I love teaching. It's my favorite thing to do in the world. And we should definitely talk.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
So
Someone's like, I'm on my way. I'm in Crown Heights.
Let's do it. I'm just a bike ride away. So you're not only an advocate for like women's physical safety, but you're such a big part of, who you present as is a woman who is Egyptian and Muslim, and you speak often about the community that has helped you on this journey. Can you tell us more about your identity, your background, and how you feel your community has been instrumental in keeping you safe?
Yeah, absolutely. I talk a lot about where I'm from. I'm from Queens. I'm really proud of my neighborhood and my neighborhood community, especially, in the post-pandemic context in the US, or like maybe in New York City. I feel proud of the resiliency of my working class community and the ways in which we like got through the difficulties of this pandemic. I grew up in a working class immigrant community where, you know, a lot of it was really interdependent. Folks were, we basically like survived and lived on mutual aid. People really were interconnected. And so growing up, it was natural for me to see like I kind of talked about aunties in my class, but like aunties gathering, right? And like really healing, like talking about their experiences and like being like shoulders for each other and being supportive of each other, right? In such a beautiful way. And being able to bring that into the type of spaces that we hold. The way immigrant women gather, right? The way women of color gather and like hold space for each other. And so a huge part of my own narrative and a huge part of my story is rooted in that community love, is rooted in that community sacrifice, and rooted in understanding that there is a world that is safe and there is a world that is like powerful. And I felt that in my community. I felt that amongst women who I am connected to, right? And so because I understand what that feels like, my vision for the world feels tangible. It feels possible. When I say I want a world where all of us are safe and in our power, I'm like, this is not impossible because it exists, right? It exists in pockets of the city, exists in pockets of the world, right? I'm sure people, you know, you've been to a space where you felt you could bring every single part of yourself. You could be authentically you 100%, right? And you feel joy, right? And you feel connected and there's laughter and there's good energy, right? Even when there's trauma and there's not laughter, you feel connected and you feel safe in ways of like through those connections. That is like what I think of when I think of my neighborhood in Astoria in Little Egypt. And that's what I want for the world as well. And that's what I want to build out through this work. So yeah, it's a really big part of my identity. I'm sure as being a Filipino woman is part of your identity as well. I know you mentioned that too.
Yeah, what you were saying about, you know, understanding those, like when you're in a space where you can be totally yourself. I grew up in a working class Filipino and Caribbean community in Toronto, actually. But since moving to New York 12 years ago, in a way, I felt like I lost that. And one of the things that was so special about this self-defense class that I organized for, you know, the handful of Asian American friends that I have here, is that it was exactly what you said. I felt, oh, I can be myself here. Everyone here understands the specific fears I have as an Asian woman. We can talk about it. We can feel traumatized by it, but we can also, you know, have fun and, you know, learn things. And that sense of community is something that a lot of the self-defense instructors I spoke to for my article told me, you know, that's a big part of it. It obviously, all women of all backgrounds can feel vulnerable to assault wherever they are, but you know, obviously women of color have felt especially vulnerable in recent years. Can you speak to, you know, like what is it that you have seen that women of color are feeling, and you know, why do they feel like they're more vulnerable these days?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's really unfortunate that our work over the past, I would say 4 years, and then also around the election became like so in demand in such a weird way where it's like you don't want, like I feel like when you run an organization like this, you're like, I don't want to be in business, like I don't want to be like busy, you know. But the reality is people feel really insecure, right, across different identity groups. Like when you work within the Jewish community, the rise of anti-Semitism, when you work with in East Asian communities, we have our Asian women facilitators like holding healing spaces. We have, you know, Black women in our community who are also facilitating healing spaces. We know that like this was the deadliest, like 2019 was the deadliest year for trans women in history, right, recorded. So there's like all these realities, right, of people where because of our identities, the intersection, right? And we know that hate-based violence impacts women disproportionately because of, again, the perception, right, that women are weaker, right? And it's the intersectionality of our identities as women, as people of color, right, as minoritized communities, as, for me, religious minority, and then my racial identity as well. It becomes confounded, and it becomes much more difficult, right? I'm like, is that person looking at me like that because I'm a woman, or is it because I'm a Muslim, or is it, like, you're just like, I don't know like what the issue is, but there's an issue. And I think this is where organizing has to go hand in hand with some of the self-defense work that we do. And I'm a huge advocate for making sure that we're doing the type of gender justice organizing, we're doing the type of advocacy to resource civil society organization to be able to support hate crime victims and survivors, to resource civil society organizations that are advocating for equal rights, right? And advocating for minority rights, supporting our small businesses, right, in Chinatown, and supporting our small businesses in Little Egypt, because these are the communities that are safe, right, for many of our communities, and also are like frontline responders to these harms. And so making sure that these communities are well resourced, making sure that these communities have the appropriate institutions to respond is part of organizing, but also ensuring that we have like anti-racism curriculum, right? And ensuring that we have local leaders that are going to fight for and on behalf of communities as visible representations is really important. Because actually, if you look at the research, hate-based violence doesn't spike around like incidents, right? If you look at it, the pandemic had been going on, and obviously hate-based violence has been going on against East Asian community for a minute, and even before this moment, right, for a while historically as well. And it spiked around the election. Why does it spike around the election? It is because oftentimes politicians will weaponize and these cleavages and these differences in identity groups, right, to galvanize a base of support. This is the reality. And we saw that with Muslim communities too. The spike literally the spike happened around election cycles. And so I think there's a real role for advocacy, or real role for organizing in order to make our communities truly safe.
I totally agree. Education is such a huge thing. So I'm primarily a science journalist, and throughout the pandemic, that's what I've been writing about, the pandemic. And to see the way that, the origin, or at least the discovery of the coronavirus in China was linked to Chinese people around the world, just like that, that it was something that I really struggled to do, to explain as a science journalist. We had to do it over and over. Just because a virus originates in one country does not mean that everyone from that country and everyone from that country who lives everywhere else, or everyone who looks like that people from that country. It has nothing to do with that. And, like you said, politicians often, used that cleavage to their advantage, which is terrible. But okay, so we have so many questions here from our wonderful audience, and I'd like to get to them. So we have a lot of like practical questions. What tips do you have for someone who is looking for a self-defense class or teacher? And are there classes that specialize in women's self-defense?
Yeah, well, Malika, definitely, I'll plug in. So if you're looking, we do virtual, we do in-person self-defense classes. We love to partner with different organizations. And so if an organization ever calls on us to do a class, we're always down to do it. And we have a sliding scale with community organizations. We do it for free. So definitely let us know. And we're super interested. There are many, many, many institutions across New York City, self-defense academies across New York City. There's a Center Against Violence in New York City as well, that teaches self-defense and does a lot of self-defense education. And then I also just suggest kickboxing, karate, even traditional forms of martial arts like karate, right? Taekwondo, Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu. These forms of martial arts are really important because they teach you even though, that's not self-defense in the way that like you would actually like go into a kata like as you're doing, but it teaches you form. And so it teaches you how to properly do a punch, right? It teaches you how to properly do a kick. It teaches you how to properly, do a fighting stance and be on your feet and be agile and be comfortable, in a fighting mode. And that could be really effective in terms of self-defense if you're willing to dedicate longer term practice. And so if you are willing to do longer term practice, I do mixed martial arts right now, and I find it super helpful. And my trainer does, has incorporates like self-defense components to the training as well. And it's an ongoing life journey, I think, the practice. And so that's really helpful. And then specific classes that are catered to, and being really careful to say, like, is this class for hate-based violence or is it for gender-based violence? Because those are different. Like if I was teaching a gender-based violence class, I would frame things so differently than if I'm teaching a hate-based violence class. And so being mindful of that too is important. And I'm seeing folks who are abroad, who are far from New York, we have trainers across the globe. And so if you are anywhere, you could also let us know, and we might have a trainer in your area who's trained to do the class.
We have another question here about, if you can't make it to an in-person class, is there any way to take classes online at home? And, is there benefit to that? This person says she has kids and she wants to take classes or have someone to help her with self-defense.
Yeah, we have self-defense classes online, especially in the pandemic. We transitioned a lot of our work online. So actually most of our classes were online over the past year. I only did like 2 in-person classes in the past year, which is really sad. So definitely stay. You could look at our Instagram. We advertise it there. It's at WeAreMalikah on Insta. And then I link the videos. Those videos are actually really helpful. They have like our baseline techniques, and you could practice them with your family, with your friends, with your children.
We have a question here that someone asking, when they're moving through the world and they spot someone who may potentially be threatening, this person says, I feel like I may ignore my instinct in an effort not to appear biased toward an individual based on their race or ethnicity. Like, how do you strike the right balance?
Yes. Oh my God. Thank you for this question. So I talk about this a lot in our longer bystander intervention, which is, are you feeling some type of way because of who the person is, or is it because of the person's behavior, right? That's a distinction that you got to make. Is it like the way they're acting? Like, are they doing something specific that is making you feel uncomfortable? Or do you feel uncomfortable because of your bias? I think that's the question that you got to ask, is just like, if someone's not doing anything, if they're literally like walking down the street and you decide you're going to cross the other street because you're like, oh, like this person of X identity, particularly, I think, a lot of people have a lot of bias towards Black people, right? Even in their own anti-racism work, particularly with Black men, right? And you're like, I crossed the street, or I held my bag closer, right? Checking yourself and being really honest with yourself to be like, did the person do something, or is it because their identity? And just being frank. If the person didn't do anything, then it's probably because of their identity.
What are things that they might be doing that would sort of validate you being on your guard?
Yeah, like for example, if they're heckling you, right? If they're directly engaging you in some way, if they're acting out and like they're throwing something, like there's like things that would make it clear that they're directing violence at you, right? And like I think people are aware of that. And again, it goes back to the 3 zones and trusting your gut, but also trusting your gut in a way that isn't necessarily going to be harmful to other people. And I have my own biases too. Like, for example, when I was attacked, I was attacked by a white man. When I see a white man on the street, I'm like I get a little bit tense, and I know that. And it's just like being aware of that, being cognizant of that. I think it also intersects with like mental health, too. I think oftentimes we react to people with mental health illness, you know, in a way that could be harmful, that could have bias as well. And I think oftentimes like not engaging in those moments and letting people do their thing, unless you're like, you know, an expert, you know how to intervene, or you have, or if there is something that you could do and you feel comfortable asking if they need help or they need something. We see that there's a lot of stigmatization right now, like we've seen in the media, of like folks with mental health issues and some of the violence that we're seeing like on the subway and stuff like this. So I think being reflective, both like in the moment and after, is really important. And as a part of anti-racism work, is a part of being like anti-ableist as well.
Thank you for explaining that. It's a tricky question, and one that I often feel like
Really
afraid
tricky.
to think about, you know. I think we have time for one more quick question. If you feel your body going into freeze mode, how do you break yourself out of it?
Yeah, I want to give, so when your body goes into freeze mode, it's actually a really beautiful response to your body is doing, which is sometimes your body, there's a book called The Politics, I think it's called the Politics of Trauma or something. And it talks about like your body and how it reacts to trauma. And your body's actually protecting your mental health and your emotional well-being by shutting down, so you don't remember what happened to you, right? Because it's protecting you emotionally from what's going on. So sometimes people will block out, right, a memory because like your mind doesn't want you to live with that memory. Your mind does not want you to live with that trauma. And it's like making sure that it's like protecting your mental health and making sure you're okay. So I would say that in those moments, if that happens to you, don't feel shame around it, because it's natural and it's your body being beautifully responsive to protecting your emotional well-being, and being okay with it. If it happens, is really important, because the worst thing is like you feel shame, your body froze, like you shouldn't have experienced that harm to begin with. It's not your fault. It's not on you. That's how your body reacted. Leave it at that. How do you break out of that? Is a lot of practice, right? Is like making sure and going through these scenarios where you are constantly building up your muscle memory, right? You're constantly getting yourself prepared. Like if you are in this moment, you know how to break out of it. That's really the only way that you do. And it's not foolproof, right? Like there are moments, like I've been doing this for over a decade. There are moments when I freeze, you know, and like I know people who are like, you know, 3rd degree black belt martial artists, and they freeze in moments too. And that's like so natural. But the only way that you could actually combat it is through practice. So constantly practice is really important.
I think that's the perfect way to end our session, and to start planning for our Washington Square Park class. I told them we should do that. I'm gonna, Rana, thank you for such a wonderful class and conversation. And
Thank you.
Ellevate folks, thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Yasmin and Rana, for a great talk on self-defense and discussion. And thank you so much for all of you who joined this morning's session. If this conversation got you thinking about what needs to change in your lives, the best way to process and make a plan of action is by attending one of our roundtables on Thursday afternoon or Friday morning. Through prioritizing and initiating conversations like the one we just had, we can share ideas on how to rebuild the equitable world we deserve. Because through collective action, you can help shape business to be more inclusive. Remember, throughout the week, we're hosting at least one feature session each day, so mark your calendars, invite your friends to attend, and let us know your favorite parts on social media by using #MobilizeWomen. Special thanks to our Mobilize Women sponsors, RBC Wealth Management, Accenture, Guardian Life, Verizon, Bunge, BakerHostetler, Diageo, Robinson+Cole, Amalgamated Bank, KeyBank, Cornell MBA, Encourage Coaching, and Mutual of Omaha. We greatly appreciate your support. Our next program sessions kick off at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. If you have a ticket, we'll definitely see you there to the 3 mentoring meetups coming up, all centered on imposter syndrome for managers, navigating a career change, and growing companies for entrepreneurs. These sessions are all sold out at the moment, so if you have a ticket, we will definitely see you there. If not, you can still check out tomorrow's roundtables. Thanks, everyone.